Edgar, it's a very unique brawler, not because of its mechanics or anything like that, but because he is very consistently seen as a very good brawler by, let's just call, low ladder players, but he is always seen as a very bad brawler at everything by ranked players and by high ladder players. So why does this happen? Today we'll take a deep dive into Edgar's history and to his role at the moment, to make me understand why is Edgar's ranking so inconsistent throughout the whole ladder. Hope you enjoy. Edgar was initially released for free. I think that this was also the first brawler to ever be released for free ever to this moment, and back then he had a couple very different stats. So, to start off, he used to have, by today's standard, less 600 HP at maximum level. His lifesteal used to be 25% instead of 35%, but in compensation, he actually had a easier to charge super, costing only 10 hits instead of the nowadays 12. And his first gadget back then used to give you the same amount of super that it does today, but in one less second, so it was just simply faster at giving the super. With all of this being said, you might think that Edgar at release was a horrible brawler, but actually much more for the opposite. When Edgar was first released, everyone thought he was absurdly broken, which it's not very surprising, because if you look at today's standards not only are a lot higher, like there is power creep happening all around Brawl Stars, damage buffs everywhere, HP buffs to a couple characters even, so it's not surprising that a character with weaker stats 5 years ago used to be insanely good, while if the character today had those same stats, it would for sure be absolute garbage. But even with that in mind, it's not that surprising. We had a very similar example to Edgar happening with Shade release. I'm not remembering exactly when Shade got released, but when Shade got released, everyone, including myself, thought that he was insanely broken, while in reality, not really. He's actually more to a noob stomper, which is very similar to Edgar, so it's good. I have this comparison to use for you to understand. But let's go back on track. So Edgar was released in 19th of December 2020, and just 2 weeks later, in 14th of January 2021, his gadget received a nerf where the gadget was brought to what it is nowadays. So instead of being 700% more super for 3 seconds, it became 525% extra super for 4 seconds. If you just multiply 3 by 700 and 4 by 525%, you'll see that it gives the exact same thing, so no big confusions there. And a lot of the pros thought that this would not change anything, because it didn't. Edgar was still considered a very good brawler for a good while, but everything changed when people just suddenly learned how to counter Edgar. And this is where things really start to have a major difference between ladder and high ladder, because in ladder, people don't really know how to counter Edgar. It's a jump, but most importantly than that, you also get this speed boost after landing. So even if a character can counter you with, I don't know, let's just say a very basic knockback, most likely they will still die due to the fact of the movement speed increase. So it's not that simple, but it's not really that complicated. Come on, how do you keep dying to Edgar? So, due to mainly community outrage, in 18th of January, Edgar's super cost was increased from 10 hits to 12 hits. So now the super costed the same as it costs nowadays, which it's honestly kinda expensive. Back in the days, it was actually somewhat easy to cycle a little bit of supers with Edgar. It was not that hard, because usually whenever you killed someone, you would get around 3/4 or 2/3 of the super back, so you didn't need it to wait that much time. But another problem to the equation, it is solo showdown, which solo showdown, let's just say that it's not exactly a competitive place. Now, honestly, I do not play that much solo showdown, and if I'm being even more honest, I do not like either solo showdown or duo showdown. I don't know why, I just don't really play them. But apparently, for some god knows sake reason, Edgar was very strong in solo showdown. And apparently Supercell thought that was enough of a reason to just nerf the super charge rate, which honestly feels a little bit out of place, but it is what it is, I guess. So with this nerf, Edgar became very bad at nearly everything. Like, you couldn't use him anywhere. The only place where he was slightly useful was football, and usually this happens a lot. Like, El Primo is not really good in a lot of places, but football he works. Usually these type of roles that don't really work anywhere, they are always somewhat viable in football, so this is not surprising at all. But if you thought that everything was just ending, the nerfs, everything, you're wrong. 2 months later, 15th of March, Edgar received the HP nerf, which translated to today's standards would mean that his HP would be reduced from 6,000 to 5,600, which I'm sure that all of you can understand that is not a lot of HP. Actually, that's mediocre at best. So this nerf was absolutely unexpected and absolutely killed Edgar. I mean, after a while, even in solo showdown, Edgar was not really that good, and not even his gadget could really save him. But on low ladder, Edgar was somewhat balanced, because he now had so little to no HP. Unless the enemy would jump on you with full ammo to being able to heal back all of the damage, you would actually have decent odds of surviving. The thing is, in ranked, people know how to counter that jump. In high ladder, just one gadget or maybe even a super, it's more than enough to absolutely destroy an Edgar. Even more if he does not have that much HP. So this nerf, in my eyes, was absolutely overkill, even at that time. You know what else is overkill? The fact that you might not be subscribed. How could you? So, if you like the content so far, please make sure to leave a like and subscribe. It took a long time to make this video, and I hope you're enjoying it. If you liked, you can also just keep watching more content, because why not? You enjoyed the content, so just keep watching it. And you can also join our Discord server with the rest of our amazing community. Link in the description. Thank you so much, and let's go to the rest of the video. So, after 4 months, Edgar would receive his second gadget, which, may I say, changed nothing. The gadget, it is absolutely useless. There is a good reason for Edgar means using the first gadget, because it gives you the super to have the approach tool to the enemies. And you might say, oh, in close maps it's good. Well, Edgar has the shortest range in the game, number one, and secondly, if you're playing on a very close map, then why are you using Edgar? There is a very good chance you might be facing Shelly, Bull, El Primo, most of the tanks that in some way do counter very well Edgar. So this gadget, I would even go as far as saying it's contradictory to Edgar's role. Like, I don't really understand its purpose. Yes, it is pretty good to do a sudden clutch in a 1v1 at some times, but that's really all it does, and to no one's surprise, this gadget changed nothing. Then, on 25th of August 2021, Edgar actually received a buff. Wow, things must have been really that bad for Edgar receiving a buff. So his life steal was increased from 25% to 35%. Now, this is really a really great buff, honestly, because this actually made so that it was not that bad for low ladder players, because guess what? Edgar, if he jumps on you with low ammo or if he misses the attacks, he's not really gonna get that much value. But a good player, if he lands all of the shots, he will heal a lot more. So in my eyes, I will say this was a really great change, and honestly, Edgar was really needing it. After a tiny while, Edgar went to more of a C tier position, where he was somewhat usable in, guess what, football. But hey, an improvement, it's an improvement, and I am sure that Edgar will receive more buffs, because his state is honestly just really bad. So yeah, Edgar wouldn't receive any more changes for the next almost 2 years, which is kinda insane considering how bad he was for how long. Like, it was honestly really sad. But after a really long wait, your HP in 25 of April 2023 was increased back to 6,000. Now, even that wasn't really that big of a change. Hey, it was better. Now you had more HP, so now if the enemy had more ammo or dealt a little bit more damage, it would not be that detrimental. So it's a buff, just unfortunately didn't really change too much. And that's why in 5th of remembering the name of the month, because apparently I cannot remember month names, of September 2023, your HP would be further increased from 6,000 to 6,600, and that's actually a quite large HP buff, a 10% HP buff. That's really good, and the pros agreed. He was somewhat of a B tier brawler almost. He was now usable in football, like actually somewhat good in football, which is nice, and apparently he was used on Heist? What the hell? That part I never truly understood. Who was the idiot that thought that Heist was a good mode for Edgar? Like, I just don't see it, but hey, the pros said it, so who am I to discuss with them? So, Edgar was slightly better and everything was going well. And the cherry on top of the cake was that on 12th of December, Edgar's hypercharge got added, and hypercharges back then were absurdly different, like not even close to today's standards. And there is one very important change. To start off, your gadget charged the hypercharge. So just imagine only needing like one gadget and a half, and you could immediately get your hypercharge. I was lucky enough to try Edgar with this brand new hypercharge, and man, people just couldn't kill me. It was so funny. On top of that, back then you could refill the duration of a hypercharge. This meant that while you were hypercharged, you would still charge the hypercharge. And because Edgar's hypercharge effect is that your charge rate is doubled, this means that you would refill the hypercharge double the amount that what you would have supposedly do. This means that it would only take one super 0.25 to refill the entire hypercharge, and that means that you only need in and around 6 ammo to do it, and if you pierce through enemies, even less. So the cycle of supers, of healing, of damage that the hypercharge could provide, all of that mixed with the fact that you can get it from gadgets, Edgar was S tier. Straight up S tier. Which is exactly why only 6 days later the hypercharge cost would be increased from 2.5 supers to 4 supers. This meant that it was significantly harder to refill the hypercharge, because now while you were hypercharged you needed 2 supers instead of 1.25 to refill the hypercharge, and it also just meant that it was a lot harder to get the hypercharge itself. So it was a very severe nerf, but Edgar was still very good, because if you activated the hypercharge and if you had 1% of your IQ activated at that moment, you could team wipe so easily. It was brutal. So in 27th of February, the rework to hypercharges happened. So now, not only star powers would no longer affect hypercharges and gadgets as well, but you could no longer refill the hypercharge while the hypercharge was active, which it's honestly quite of a big nerf. That was one of the reasons why Edgar's hypercharge was one of the strongest of them all. Not to mention that his hypercharge did also had some stat nerfs. Both the damage and the shield got reduced from 25% to only 15%. And his speed got a 4% increase, but honestly, that doesn't really change anything. Your super already gives you movement speed increase. Who thought that this was a fair trade? And now this brings us to today. So Edgar hasn't received a single change since the 27th of February 2024. So a lot has changed since then. More hypercharges were introduced, and obviously power creep is a thing, and because of both of those factors, Edgar is now significantly weaker. Like, even after the hypercharge nerf or rework, whatever you want to call it, Edgar was still seen as a nice pick because the hypercharge still guaranteed a lot of damage and a lot of value. But new hypercharges got added, a lot of balance changes, new brawlers. And all of that just made Edgar's life a lot harder. And Edgar nowadays, it's almost back to that 2021 state where he's just simply nearly unusable. Like, before he received the HP nerf kind of style where he's just not good, he doesn't really provide the value that he's meant to give, and yeah, noobs will use him, but that's due to one thing. And I noticed that this is the major difference between ranked or high ladder and low ladder. Consistency on your power. Edgar, it's not consistent at all. You either need to be ridiculously close to the enemy, or you need the super. And if the enemy has even one way to counter your super, your consistency, it's gone. You won't be able to do nearly anything. That's why the hypercharge is so fundamentally necessary. You need it to cycle supers and also to delete people, which it's just necessary. Without the hypercharge, Edgar, it's nearly nothing. Edgar has become worse in my eyes than just a noob stomper. He has become extremely reliant on his hypercharge, which brings an extra problem, which is the fact that you cannot buff his baseline because otherwise the hypercharge will bring severe consequences. So, what do you do in this scenario? Well, I feel like there are two ways you can fix this. The first way I would call another hypercharge rework, but this is not really a rework. This feels more actually like a rebalance, if that's not the same thing. So, the hypercharge rate would be severely increased from 40%, which means 2.5 supers, to 60%, which means 1.66 supers. And I know that is a massive buff, but this would come with severe nerfs to the stat increases. Both the damage and the shield would be reduced from 15% to 5%, and the movement speed increase would be reduced from plus 24% to plus 15%. So, why would I do this? Well, because the hypercharge is necessary to cycle supers, which is what Edgar is really missing at the higher levels of play, and also the reload buff, it's not really important, but it does allow to confirm kills. Removing the plain stat buffs, but making the important parts at high ladder more persistent and happening more throughout the match could make Edgar better at high ladder and in ranked, but not as good in low ladder, because I have seen Edgar's just activating the hypercharge without even having the super, which it's just ridiculous. Like, who they think they are? It's so bad, really. The second way, and honestly my personal favorite, would be to reduce his super cost from 12 hits to 9 hits. Now, these would be a very big buff. We have seen characters go back to the meta and fall off the meta just because of charge rate changes like this. But the idea is very simple. If you get the super more times, that means that you can cycle your super a lot more and do team wipes. But the major factor is a couple of times whenever you face tankier enemies, which there are a couple of them right now, you sometimes want to use your super in a more defensive way, trying to dodge certain supers or things like that. And that's where low ladder people can't really do. They can't really do the value of dodging a super by using your super and keeping pressure. That's something that it's not seen or even heard of in low ladder. In high ladder or in ranked, dodging supers and reducing the value of them to the enemy team, it's nearly fundamental, and therefore I can see this change being very good. The only tiny consequence that it could have would be that Edgar might need a hypercharge rate nerf after this one, because just simply buffing his supercharge rate also means that the hypercharge would be easier to get. So probably just for safety, would also reduce the charge rate of the hypercharge from 40% to 35%, which would mean that it would require 2.85 supers instead of 2.5 supers. So that could save Edgar, but truth being said, Edgar is a noob stomper, and also the game does need characters like him. Like, not every character needs to be good in ranked and in ladder as well, but I would like to see that balance. I like balance. So, hope you enjoyed today's video, and I'll see ya on the next one.